Hello, welcome to this Conversations on the Crisis in Pakistan. My name is Steve Lyon. I am the Professor of Anthropology, Head of Educational Programs at the Aga Khan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. It's a great pleasure to be able to moderate this event in conjunction with my very dear friend Nadir Chima, who is not going to be on camera today, but he is the kind of driver of Bloomsbury, Pakistan. We're doing this with Bloomsbury, Pakistan, because the Aga Khan University ISMC, Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations, has a very broad kind of remit to look at culture, society, history, religion, literature, the Muslim world. And the Muslim world is very big. Bloomsbury, Pakistan has a kind of more focused remit to carry out research, be a resource center, facilitate networks on Pakistan. It's got a very long history in the UK. I think it originally started in Oxford, but somehow morphed itself into Bloomsbury of London. So Nadir is, I don't remember his official role in Bloomsbury, Pakistan, but he has been the real force behind it. And he roped me in on this when I moved down to London. So I am now a senior research fellow in Bloomsbury, Pakistan. And we thought, the focus of Bloomsbury, Pakistan, the focus of AKU ISMC, we absolutely need to come together and do something. And so right now, what we decided to do is a series of conversations specifically focused on Pakistan, but looking at how Pakistan is responding to this current crisis, the coronavirus crisis. And each of the conversations will hone in on a specific topic. So today we want to talk about education. I have two speakers here. You only see one at the moment. This is next to me, Dr. Farid Panjwani. Farid Panjwani will join Dr. Faisal Bari. Once we sort out the technical issues with him, we will have the three of us. The two of them will have I think, a very robust conversation, and I will be on the sidelines refereeing and moderating, so they don't spit at each other. They'll be very well behaved. They're very civilized young men. I could not be happier with the choice of speakers today. I think both Dr. Panjwani and Dr. Bari are eminent scholars in the field of education. Where are we? There we are. Dr. Panjwani, I met when I came and joined AKU because he has a long relationship with AKU and ISMC. He is currently the director at the Center for Research and Evaluation in Muslim Education at UCL, University College London. He has a DPhil from Oxford on the philosophical challenges in the pursuit of social cohesion in a multicultural society, and postgraduate degrees in education, international development, Islamic studies, and business administration. At UCL, Dr. Panjwani founded the Center for Research and Evaluation in Muslim Education, CREAM. This has been underpinned by the university's commitment to inclusive education and social justice. Using that, building on that, the center has sought to strengthen education in Muslim contexts along the lines of a research-based, progressive, and inclusive educational philosophy. He is a member of the National Commission on Religious Education, and over the years, he sat on the advisory boards of a number of organizations, including ISMC. So he has always been a friend of ISMC, I have to say. And we are very pleased and very proud that he has also been appointed as the new dean of the Institute for Education and Development based in Karachi. Now, that's not his current affiliation, but it will be not too long in the future. Once we're all able to travel around again, we're very happy that we will have Dr. Panjwani with us in AKU, the big AKU family. Although given how global we are, we'll probably see him as often in London as we do now. Our second speaker, who hopefully my colleague is working out these technical issues with him now, Dr. Faisal Bari, is an equally eminent scholar in the field of education. He is the director and senior research fellow at IDEAS. Dr. Bari obtained a BA from University of Oxford, BSc from Government College Lahore, MA in philosophy, University of Punjab, and a doctorate in economics from McGill University. He served as the deputy country director for Pakistan with the Central Eurasia Project and an education economist for South Asia in the Open Society Foundation. He's an associate professor of economics at LUMS, and he has served as head of department from 2006 to 2008. So he has a very long history of not only excellent scholarship, but also administrative educational leadership. He has over 12 years experience in the field of industrial economics, development economics, and education economics. He's a former executive director and current visiting research fellow at the Mahbub Haq Human Development Center. Dr. Bari is consulted for various multilateral and bilateral agencies, including the World Bank, UNDP, DFID, and the Asian Development Bank. Now, I first encountered Dr. Bari through Dawn, the daily newspaper, English language daily newspaper based out of Karachi. He is a regular contributor of opinion pieces, largely on economics and education, and most recently, he has been writing a blog on the challenges facing Pakistan in the educational challenges facing Pakistan during this coronavirus crisis. I think it's fair to say that both of these men have spent a great deal of time trying to make better sense of education, but also trying to change education, trying to influence education. So very recently, Dr. Panjwani and I were having a conversation about this, and he was very, very clear that we must separate education from learning, and we must think actually rather creatively and outside the box, particularly now, but even before. Lyle, have we got any luck with getting Dr. Bari onto the program, onto the screen?
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're near audio. Okay, fantastic. Yes. Okay, so we have Dr. Bari with us in voice, and at some point we may get a camera, but if we don't get a camera, what matters here is his brilliance and his wisdom, which we'll get through audio. Okay, so we had a pre-conversation a couple of last week, and we talked through some of the big issues that we thought need to be addressed here in this conversation, in this panel. And I think we all agreed that Dr. Bari summed up some of the top 3 priorities facing Pakistan right now in education, and that could really give us a steer for this conversation. So if you don't mind, Dr. Bari, can you talk us through what you see the 3 biggest challenges facing Pakistan in education and crisis at the moment?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation to be here. I'm very sorry, for some reason my camera is not working, but that might be good as well, because I haven't been to a barber for 2 months now, so my beard and other things might not be very presentable. But in terms of higher education, so I'm going to start with higher education, because that's where I think the problems are very different at school level. Higher education, I think there are 3 big baskets that I'm looking at, which are creating which we have to understand. One has to do with purely access issues in terms of internet, where the internet is and isn't, how stable it is, and how slow or fast it is. So all 3 of these are problematic, in the sense that if you're trying to do synchronous classes, then you need a fairly stable broadband internet available. If that's not available, that creates a huge issue in terms of people participating in the class. If it is asynchronous, then you can do with some instability and issue of a narrower bandwidth, but still it has to be present. For many of our students, that's an issue, and that is especially an issue with people living in remote areas, living in villages. So there's a rural-urban dimension to it, there's a geographic dimension to it, which is provincial, and there might be some gender dimension to it, because access to phones and tablets and computers might not be the same across both genders in this case. So that's one basket which we have to worry about, and if you're serious about including all students, then we have to make sure that we allow the purchase or whatever of devices, as well as get the internet connections in place. The second basket which I'm seeing is, and this I'm thinking in a different way now. I think in some ways the university space, both access to classes and access to library, etc., they are an equalizer in many ways as well. So they provide a space in which all students can be together and they can be who they are. Home environments are very different, and that differences in home environments in terms of whether you have a room to yourself or not, whether you have privacy, whether you have somebody shouting in the background that makes it difficult to participate, whether you can get stretches of concentration where you sit down and work on your computer and submit papers, etc. All of those varies a lot across households, and again across gender and other cleavages as well. And so we have to worry about that, because some of our students are much more able to have that space, some are not. All of them used to be in our classroom, at least within the classroom, within the university premise, within the library, they had that space equally. But now at homes, they don't have that space. So that's the second bit, which is that home environments have suddenly become much more important. The third bit is about learning. What happened was there was a sudden lockdown, and we were given 2 or 3 weeks to shift all our teaching. Those universities who could shift it online, and for those who couldn't, they've been given till end of May to do it. So universities have been told that they have to start 1st of June. Now that's a quick transition. So what we did was whatever we could do in terms of content change, in terms of our assessments, etc., we quickly repackaged that and brought it onto the internet and online. But whether that repackaging is optimal or not is still very much a question, in the sense that should a class now be 3 hours, or should it be reduced to 2 hours or 1 hour? Should lectures be recorded prior? What should be the optimal structure of lectures? Should it be 15 minutes? Because people say that your attention wanders very differently online as opposed to when you're sitting in classes. And what should be the optimal engagement on assessments? How do you gauge well? Is it only the option of writing papers and doing take-home exams? Are there other options, etc.? A lot of work needs to be done there as well. And I think in Pakistan, at least, we have just started this process because we didn't have the time to do a lot of this work beforehand. So these are the 3 large buckets that I think are very important to think about as we think of education at the university level. I don't know if, Steve, you want me to go on to the school side now, or should we come back to that later?
Why don't we come back to that? Let's let Dr. Panjwani, I know that Dr. Panjwani had particular kind of slightly grander scale focus that he was interested in, more at a kind of societal level, and how this feeds into that. So Dr. Panjwani, can I ask you to respond and kind of elaborate a little bit?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation and for your kind introduction. I think Dr. Bari has very comprehensively laid the issues that are of immediate concern to higher education sector. I think some of it also touches upon the schools, for example, the matter of access. Let me focus more on school, but not on the immediate issues, which I'm sure Dr. Bari will come back to, but on some other points, 3 or 4 points that I want to raise. One, I think we use this phrase, online learning, which is a very attractive phrase, but I think it is also somewhat misleading, because just as we cannot be sure that if somebody is sitting in a classroom in front of a textbook and listening to a teacher, that learning is taking place, we cannot be sure that if one is sitting in front of a screen using some internet package, listening to somebody, learning takes place. So it's better to think of it as online platform, while the learning is something different. Learning takes place inside the person. And for learning, you have to create educational experiences that helps the person, the student, to engage with information, to engage with what is available. And the learning is a subjective process that takes place. Now, what are the implications of these moving to online platforms? I think over a period of time, the access issue will become less problematic, because there is a huge effort now being made to provide more and more access. And this means that students, even at the school level, will have greater accessibility to different kinds of information. And as the demand will be there, people will supply information as well. So now what do we do? What is the implication? Is this huge amount of information, more information than previously they had just through their textbook, necessarily a good thing? I don't think so. So, for example, if you don't know how to swim, or you're a poor swimmer, and then you are put in a bigger pool of water, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll do well. It could be harmful to you as well. So I think that's where we should also bring attention to the role of the teacher. That changes quite a lot in the online context, because the students have now a very direct connection with information that is there. And those who are interested may even be able to go much more than what the textbooks and their packages are offering. This may not be there across the board, but there is certainly a segment of society where access may not be an issue. So we have to ask the question about the learning experience itself. And I think this is where we might want to think, at least those of us who are in a position to consider these issues, what is the role of the teacher in this new dynamics that we have? Well, we often go back to Socratic method and think of a teacher as a pedagogical midwife. And I think this will become even more important for us to consider. What is the relationship between, a critical relationship between the learner and the knowledge claims that he or she finds becomes more important? Because if you have so much available on the net and you have access to it, the capacity to sift through it, to see what is really genuine, what is not, to ask deeper questions about knowledge becomes very important. Take, for instance, just history as an example. We get in our books, as well as now hugely amount on our websites, many information about the past. I think it becomes very important that we now start to ask questions about how do students engage with that information, what kind of questions they should be asking. Even if it's simply a list of facts, it's never a list of facts, because it's a selection of facts from a huge number of other possibilities that are there. There's interpretation that happens. The questions about whose history is put in the curriculum, whose history is not there. And I think these will become very important questions as we go forward, if we have to ensure that it's not just information that we are talking about, but genuine learning and engagement with knowledge that we are talking about. I think we'll have to move to ask questions, how do we help students think like a historian or like a scientist, and not simply accumulate facts about the past and facts about the physical world? So that's, I think, a very important issue for teacher educators and colleges and universities that engage in teacher education, to think forward about the nature of learning in the electronic and online platforms that we are talking about. Second, the schools are often also criticized for being quite a place of conformity. Children come to schools with their own individuality, but they, in a mass education system, go through the same kind of textbooks, same kind of exam system, same teaching learning approaches. And it is often said that there is a compromise on their own ability to make sense of the world, and they are given an experience which is very uniform for millions of children. And often that individuality remains in spite of schooling rather than because of schooling. Now, I think, again, if we think about online platforms, it can create the opportunity that the learning can be calibrated, customized to whatever extent possible in accordance with the individuality of the child and his or her interests and aptitudes, because different children can have different desires to learn more about different aspects of society or history or arts or music. And I think it may be possible to be more mindful of the individuality of the child. Individualism is different, but individuality of the child. And so that's an opportunity I see, again, if we are able to think broadly about education and deeper questions about how to make better education experiences. The last thing I want to say, and it connects with what Dr. Bari was saying about access issues and differences in the way rural and urban areas, or even sometimes gender, of course, socioeconomic divide is there. This digital divide is, in fact, a reflection of socioeconomic divide and class divide that we have in society generally. And it's not just about Pakistan, but I think one of the things that coronavirus has demonstrated once again to us across the board is how unequal our societies are in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of even what it means to stay at home and be socially isolated. The economic impact is going to be hugely different in different groups of people. And that raises the bigger question of what kind of society we want to have in future. Do we want to continue with the structures of society that have led to these inequalities, or do we want to rethink them? And that question of the future of society and the future of individual is very important for education, because that forms the basis of what we call the philosophy of education. What kind of education do we need if we want to create future societies that are more just, more fair, and giving better equalities of opportunities across the board? And I think this is a very important question that we can ask in this time. Do we want to continue with the kind of philosophies that we have, or we want to rethink the philosophy of education? Again, this is in some ways not possible in the immediate future, because we are concerned with very task of resources and infrastructure. But I think, again, segments of society, at the universities, other places where it is possible to do this kind of thinking, I think this is a good time to engage in them before we lose out this opportunity which has been presented to us.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over back to Dr. Bari, I think this is fascinating what you're talking about. Both of you talking about it's much bigger than just schools. It's much bigger than just universities. And it reminds me of two very important, well-read publications. One by Howard Zinn, People's History of the United States. And in that concluding chapter of his book, he talks about this kind of almost magical moment in US history in the 60s, 50s and 60s, when education was different. And we started to teach people what you're talking about, the individuality, the sort of the options, that there's more things you can do than simply be what your parent was. And of course, then he says this led to profound disappointment among individuals, because when they got out into the wider society, actually there weren't those options. So I think you're right to tie this to the bigger social issues, because if we teach our kids they have choice, they have their individuality matters and can shape their future, and then we don't do anything about the economic modes of production around them, well, then they're just even less happy, less satisfied than their parents, who might have had a more fatalistic notion that, okay, this is my lot in life, I will do this and then I will die, and that's all I can aspire to. Certainly, I think we've all known, some of the peasants I've worked with, they are, I wouldn't say happy, but they didn't expect more in life than what they got. Whereas their children now absolutely expect more, and they're much less satisfied. They're much more openly critical of the structures of power around them. The second one is Cherry Lindholm's chapter in Charles Lindholm's book about Pashtun socialization, in which they talk about the brutality to which children are exposed, and how this is, it seems awful, but this is preparation for the society into which they will live. That it is a society that you must be able to deal with some levels of violence, some levels of duplicity, some levels of that kind of factional conflict that goes on, and childhood prepares you for that. So I think your point is absolutely apt. Our schooling should prepare our children for the society into which they will live, but that doesn't mean the society in which we live now is the one we should just be settled and satisfied with. So Dr. Bari, can I hand over to you to respond to, or to elaborate, because I know you have a lot to say about the schools themselves rather than the kind of bigger society issues.
All right. So, I mean, let me start narrowly and then maybe broaden it out a little. I think there are some big issues we have to think about in the sense of when it comes to schooling. One is the fact that in Pakistan, by one estimate or another, around 20 million children between the ages of 5 and 16 were out of schools even before Corona became an issue. And now all schools have been closed since the beginning. I think it was 10th, 11th March where we went into a lockdown, and it's been almost 2 months now. And though schools were slated to start on 1st of June, now the thinking in government seems to be that it might be much later than that. Now the question is how, what happens to a lot of the learning that is happening. Do we offer an online version like the one that we have started in universities? How do we think about, so the socioeconomic issues and the inequalities that we were talking about of access, of home environment, and in the ones that Farid was also talking about in terms of much deeper inequalities, those are much more entrenched and much more obvious in the school system than in the university system. I mean, university system, you have to, Pakistan, there's only 7-8% of people. So the child that starts in grade 1, only 6 or 7 of them finish high school and go to the university, right? So there's a very strong selection by choice or by default that happens as people go into the university. So they're a much narrower set in terms of the inequalities. But if you talk about school children and those 20 million who are out, we're talking of the entire spectrum of inequality that exists in Pakistan. And the lower side of that spectrum is very, very poor, has very poor infrastructure, has problems of malnutrition, has significant issues of health, and so on and so forth, right? So to think about education, where I agree with clearly, there are tremendous opportunities here also of trying to rethink it and have some notion of equality of opportunity being brought in, whether it is through more customized systems and more customized infrastructure, etc. The problem, I think, is that the problem is just too large, and I think we're going to have trouble even catering to those who are already in school, far less going beyond and trying to get to those who are not in school, whether it is formal systems or informal systems. I mean, those who are in school, you have to remember in Pakistan, we have multiple systems where the top 2, 3, 4% roughly go to elite private schools, and they've already started online instruction, and they're fine. They'll buy the latest Zooms and this and that, and they'll do whatever is needed. But the bulk of the children are going to, 60% odd go to government schools, and then another 35% odd go to either low fee, medium fee private schools or not-for-profits, profit schools, etc. All of them catering to up to middle class or so. There, the lack of resources on the parent side and even on the school side is very, very clear and apparent. I mean, right now, and the government was between a rock and a hard place, where when the schools were closed for 2 months, parents were demanding, because of the pandemic and the recession and depression and loss of jobs, they were demanding that there should be some relief on tuition fees even for those 2 months. Schools were saying that if you give them relief and you lower our fees for these 2 months, we won't be able to pay the teachers. And I think for most schools, that is true, that both of these problems were very real. There isn't enough slack for these schools that they can pay from past savings. And so if they don't get fees, they don't get to pay the teachers. On the other hand, parents were hurting. They are hurting because the economy is slowed down and most of the businesses are closed. So how do you get out of this system? Many schools might actually close come July or August because they won't know how to restart the systems because they've been out of cash flow, and they'll have cash flow issues, they'll have working capital issues, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot to be thought even at that sort of very immediate mechanical level of how do you bring back the system to what it was, and then to think of what Farid was saying, to go beyond that and think really hard about what kind of education do we want to give our children, and all children, and across all sorts of divides that we are talking about. I think that problem, I mean, I would love to be a witness to people seeing a solution to those, but I have a feeling that's not going to happen in the near future.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's really interesting. I'd like to save some time at the end for questions from the audience. There's a bunch of you out there. If you use the chat window, not the chat window, the questions window, you type in your questions. I will read out the questions to Dr. Panjwani and Dr. Bari and give them a chance to respond. But I think, Dr. Panjwani, if I could ask you, just push you a little bit on how you take this education. Where do you see, given what Dr. Bari has just said, that some schools will close, that there isn't that kind of endowment foundation that would allow most schools to survive this? How do we go from where we are now to where we would like to be, rather than just a complete collapse of the education system in Pakistan?
Yes, I fully agree that there are immediate concerns that need our attention, and the inequalities and the challenges that we are facing need immediate attention. I think the two things that might be there. One is the importance of education in schooling is very widely recognized. That is why parents of any resources that they have, they are willing to put it in children's education. This is where we see huge growth of low-cost private schoolings as well. So I think if we think in over the course of few months, I believe that both the supply and demand factors would come together, that our access to information and education online will probably reach the stage that we have offline right now. It's very difficult and challenging, as out of school children were mentioned as well. So I think already we are in a very difficult situation. But I'm hoping that because of the supply and demand factors, because this will also be seen as a business opportunity by many people to provide these infrastructure and then softwares and packages, we probably will see that we will reach similar stages of inequalities and digital divide that we have in the brick and mortar system right now. The question then is, where do we go now? Because the current situation we have is because of the decisions that we made 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, the policies that we made, the educational decisions that we made. If we now think in the future and see where do we want to be in 20 years and 30 years, because this coronavirus crisis is not the last one that we are getting. It's very likely that we will be hit by something more severe in next 10 years' time. I think part of the society must start to think in the long run. While a lot of people will have to put in efforts to think about immediate issues, I think those of us who have some stability in life, who have access and resources to put some effort in long-term thinking should also be done at the same time. And some debate and discussion about the nature of education and the nature of knowledge we want our young people to engage with should also happen. So I'm suggesting that we do short-term, immediate crisis management without completely giving up on asking longer-term questions as well. Because sooner or later, the crisis, we will reach a stage of managing it of some level. But we don't want that level to then continue where we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We want to have something new, hopeful situation. And I think education is about that hope. And I hope that perhaps in universities, through public conversations or media, we start to ask deeper questions as well, while also paying attention to all the immediate issues that are there. And I think we will reap the benefits of this bilateral thinking, two ways of thinking, immediate issues, but not forgetting that these immediate issues will need to also prepare us for a better future. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in the similar kind of situation 10 years from now, 15 years from now as well. And I think once a society starts to engage at both the levels, then we might be able to see progress in next few years.
Thank you very much. Now, we're starting to get a lot of questions over here. So I'd like to read out a few of the questions and give each of you a chance to respond to them. I'll start with a question from Shehzad Jiva. This is a question for both speakers. He's asked a question specifically to one of you, but also to both of you. So I'll start with the one to both of you. In most countries, he says, the academic year is concluded with examination or assessment. Many countries were on the verge of starting their examination. In such a scenario as a response to COVID-19, what would be the right approach by schools, by the government, keeping in view Pakistan's context? So how do we conclude this year if we don't do the exams?
So my take on this is that this is not the first time we have taken this route that I'm just going to mention. This happened in 76 also, 1976 that is, when I was in grade 1 or 2, I'm not sure, I think grade 2 or something. Due to political turmoil, schools were closed for a few months. And what was done was that all grades were moved to the next grade level without examination, based on the assumption that their students had almost finished that year, which is true here also, except the board examination, etc., because those school leaving examinations sometimes needed to still get done. So there we have two options, I think. For all other classes, we should just move students up. Where there are school leaving exams or board exams and anything like that, there we have two options. One, to go to internal examinations and let the schools give school leaving certificates. The universities take their own intaking exams, their entrance exams anyway, so they can always do that if they want to. That's one option, or delay the board exam till, say, later fall or January. Now, what that will do is put in at least 6-8 months of delays in everything, and the school year for the university will have to be thought through. But my feeling is that if we can go to so my own preference would be the school leaving certificate from schools and let the universities take entrance exams if they want to, and that should be fine, I think. But and delaying too much will be a bad idea, because that puts a spanner into the entire system for a long time to come.
Thank you. Just before you respond to that, Dr. Panjwani, David Taylor has asked a kind of associated question. What's likely to happen with public examinations given their current role as gatekeeping mechanisms? If they're gone, what do you think happens to them?
I mean, I've written on this before also. Even before COVID, I was arguing that I don't understand why we have metric and FSC exam the way they are in Pakistan. What's the point of it? Seems that those exams were just being used as a exclusionary mechanism and as a ranking system in some ways, where I didn't see any utility for a lot of utility for those exams, because there are plenty of countries and places where you don't have high stakes one exam at the end of the year. Instead, you have school leaving certificates, and the universities can do their own selection, etc. Think of United States as an example. For there, we don't have a whole US-wide examination system that ranks school leaving individuals. So I think might be an opportunity to think a lot about it. But the problem is that the way boards are organized in Pakistan, they are so entrenched in the system that they won't let this kind of rethinking. I know I'm committing almost blasphemy here, but they're not going to let this rethinking happen. And so what is likely to happen is that we will have a delayed board exam rather than a rethinking of it, and possibly move towards bringing low stakes examinations later.
Okay, thank you. As a wonderfully short question here, but it's absolutely loaded with good stuff. And I think this is directly for you, Dr. Panjwani. Are we building, this is from Mahmood Khan, are we building false consciousness through the current education system that needs to be he says deco-modification. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it needs to be modified. So Dr. Panjwani, I know you have thought about this.
Okay, thank you very much. But let me, before I respond to this, go back to the exam issue as well. I think this is precisely the point I was trying to make earlier, that this gives us, because this is showing what is necessary in a system and what is not necessary. This hiatus that we have, this pause that we have, is making us aware that what is important and what is not important. And it's just like we were saying, that we can already ask the question, why do we need so much examination? What is the purpose? from grade 1 to grade 10, 11, whatever. Can we take this opportunity to ask bigger questions about the purpose of exams and link between learning and examinations that should be there organically and whether it is there or not? So it may not be possible immediately, but if I think more and more people through these kind of conversations become aware and conscious of these questions, we might see a societal move and discourse that can help break the inertias that Dr. Bari was talking about. These things take time, but they only happen if there's a conversation in the society that starts to happen. Coming to this question of course, I think this is true in many ways, whether we look at how we teach history, which I think many people have commented, from K.K. Aziz's book, Murder of History, to many recent works, we are creating mindsets that do not help us in many ways, even with our national priorities. And I think the emphasis that we give to STEM subjects, for example, needs to be balanced with bringing in some humanities and literature. There's again an opportunity here to think about that. There will be lots of barriers, but it is true, I completely agree. I think there is a need for rethinking what kind of history, what kind of literary genres, what kind of image of science, what relationship between science and religion, what understandings of religion that we are giving. I think it may take time, but eventually we will have to make a decision whether we want to bring more progressive ideas to our education or not. A small segment of society gets that, but that is not enough. We need more educated public who can think as a citizen, who can participate as active citizen, and not simply carry the subject mentality that our education systems have often created in our people in public.
Thank you very much. I have a question here that I think is another good one for either one of you, but this comes from Anjum Halai, who is our deputy or vice provost at Aga Khan University, who has a long history in our Institute of Education, both in East Africa and in Pakistan. And she says, how do we ensure that the weaknesses in the current face-to-face system of teaching and learning are not repackaged in the online system? What are some of the measures that could be ensured at this stage? And I think that is the sort of golden question. How do we jettison the bad as we move forward? Either one, who would like to answer that one?
Okay, I'll make an attempt. I think this is a fascinating point, because this is precisely where the opportunity lies, that when we are moving to new platforms, how do we try, to the extent possible, not carry the weaknesses of the old system and think. And I suppose this is where one important question that we can ask, and particularly since we are in the sphere of the Aga Khan University, and which works very closely on teacher education, I would suggest that if we ask the question of the role of the teacher and the relationship, this triad between content, student, and teacher, how do we rethink that so that we create a critical relationship between student and knowledge, and the role of the teacher in doing that? I think just as one example, this could be a very powerful way in which we can think about moving away from the weaknesses of the face-to-face learning. As I said, it is first of all important to realize that just because we move the platform, we don't create better learning. It will require a new understanding of the relationship between information, student, and teacher. And I think if we can start some kind of thinking, some research projects, some ideas that allows us in AKU perhaps can take lead on these kinds of issues to rethink and precisely raise the question that Anjum has raised here.
Thank you. Dr. Bari, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think a lot of responsibility comes on faculties of education and on Higher Education Commission itself as well, to try to jumpstart, fund, organize, get organized a bunch of research in this area, which we are lacking right now in the Pakistani context. What needs to happen is, I know AKU is very well placed. I think the IAD is very well placed because they've always had a very strong focus within the classroom, in the school, and with the teachers. And so I think what we need to do is really go down to that level, and by down I mean micro, to that level, and start thinking very carefully about each element that is going to change and that needs to change to allow for much better learning online. What's the length of the class? What's the appropriate method of whether it's a recorded lecture or synchronous or non-synchronous? What are the appropriate tools? How do you hold the child's attention? And it is going to get a lot more difficult as you go down to younger children, because of the reason that the notion of responsibility and self-learning is very different for a university student as opposed to a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, etc. So a lot more work then needs to be done across the entire spectrum for us to be able to come to some notion, if not of optimality, but at least of some much more educated responses to where we need to go on this one. And that might take quite a bit of time. I'm not arguing that we do randomized controlled trials and wait for 4 years or 3 years, but it will require a lot of work to actually get to the point where we can have good comfort. You see, right now I see one problem that, I mean, the problem is everyone talks about online learning because obviously we have been forced there. A lot of people think it might be inferior to face-to-face, which in some ways it is, and it is non-commensurate as well. But right now we don't know the full potential of online learning because we haven't really tried to optimize there. We haven't really tried to create the right instruments there. Whereas in face-to-face, we have now for a long time been doing a lot of research. So that kind of change in research focus needs to happen for us to be able to do that. And this will not be wasted in any way, in the sense that if nobody's thinking that this is going to go away in a few months. Even if the first wave, etc., goes away, we are likely to have social distancing and other precautions in place and SOPs in place. So I think this needs to now be thought of as something that will remain with us for a long time, and maybe much longer, because the school model might require some rethinking anyway when you have a very young and large population, school-going population, like Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and a number of other countries too.
Thank you. I've got a question that's actually very near to my heart from Camilla Hadi Chaudhry about anxiety levels among students. And she says, evidence of anxiety about remote learning, i.e. meeting learning outcomes at home in rural lower income areas is potent. To reduce this, can you imagine a way of reducing learning inequality post-lockdown by cutting the cohort-specific learning outcomes to pre-lockdown time, e.g. December? So she says, can we focus on catching up rather than new learning post-return to schools? Can I put this to you? Dr. Bari, go ahead.
So, I mean, this is partly one thing we don't know is how long the schools are going to remain closed. I mean, my mind works better through creating examples, etc., sometimes very extreme. This is common in philosophy also, but anyway, think of the extreme example in the sense that if the schools are only closed for 2 months, which they do in the summer anyway, we might not have a large problem of remedy. We might just have a problem of regular, some revision, and then you go on, and I don't think that will be much of an issue. But if the schools remain closed for 4, 6, whatever months, and if even in households there's differential responses to how children are spending their time now, as in girls are being asked to do more home sibling care or home care as opposed to boys. Across the income spectrum, there are differences in how people are spending time. Some are reading books, some are not, some are doing something that is educational, some are not. Then you will have a problem possibly of the distribution of learning at the end of this period of isolation or closure to be much wider than where you might be at the beginning. This is a hypothesis. It need not be the case, but it's a hypothesis that there might be some people who were already behind, who will be further behind, who would have forgotten other things as well, who never got the chance to learn more, etc. in the summer. So would we need remedial classes for them? I think it's very possible that we might do, but that will have to be differentially seen across. The problem is the same school, if they were doing a bad job of teaching in the first place, which a lot of our schools were, if they are asked to do remedial classes also, I don't know how good a job they'll do of that also. So, again, some rethinking at a larger level will have to be done, that what does remedy mean in this case, and how will we deliver that remedy? Is it the same teacher who was not being able to do a good job, we ask him to give extra time? That alone might not be enough. So we really need to think about what remedial education will mean in this case.
So a number of people are asking questions about just the logistics of return to school. Once return to school, is it possible to maintain the social distance, given that Pakistani schools tend to be fairly crowded? I used to visit a school in Attock district that had classes of 80 boys, all crammed into a very small room that's smaller than the classrooms we use for 9 students. And also hand washing, is it going to be possible to have hand sanitizers, particularly in rural schools? What do you think, Dr. Panjwani? I mean, is this realistic? Is it possible for Pakistan's, not the elite schools of the super private wealthy kids, but ordinary kids in Pakistan, are they going to be able to maintain the kinds of social distance that we might expect here in the UK?
Well, this is a question even in the UK as well. And you know it quite well that this is a debate that is happening, when to open the schools and in what ways to open the school. So this is a situation that is not just being faced in Pakistan or in countries with developing economies, but even countries with developed economies and much advanced education system also is facing precisely these questions. I think this is where perhaps, again, we go back to the question of rethinking and creativity. And maybe we might want to now think about schools as not the exclusive domain of teaching and learning. And if, where possible, the online platforms catch up, some distribution of teaching and learning between online and the schooling physical space might have to be found. This is a problem that I suppose will be very hard to come up with a singular formulaic answer to it. It will have to be thought through at the local level, in the local context. And I think what will help is if we ensure that the schools and the local context is empowered to find solutions for their own issues, rather than impose one solution which may not work in very different kind of contexts. So I suppose this is what I would suggest, that also to look at other countries and see countries in similar situations. If they are coming up with some best practices, some things that are working, it's an opportunity to look around and see what other experiments that are happening. But I don't have an immediate solution to these things, except to say that, look, perhaps different countries will have to share their experiences and see what works or doesn't work, and perhaps trust the local context to try and find solutions to their particular issues. But Dr. Bari may have some more pragmatic responses as well.
Dr. Bari.
So we can make SOPs, but we know that given the number of people that are there, number of children, no SOP is going to be followed in that sense, in terms of hand washing and social distancing. I don't know why it's called social distancing, why not just distancing, but anyway. That's not going to happen. We are right now doing an experiment of that sort in mosques in Pakistan. So unlike many Muslim countries, Pakistan did not close down mosques, and there are some prayers happening. And in many mosques, even adults are not following some of the SOPs that have been set up. So to expect that from very young children, who will be children, is just beyond. I think following Farid, I completely agree. We have to figure out, it might be that schools are told that, okay, on any given day, only X percentage of your enrolled children can come. The rest of them have to stay home and learn through some online system. So each child gets to come to the school twice or thrice in a week or less than that. And you rotate and you alternate and so on. And in the meantime, they have support at home for online learning. I don't know whether something like that can work out or not. Some systems will be able to do that much better than others. It might also be that you could think of teachers going into other spaces and helping children there, thinking about tutorial systems and so on. It's very hard right now to think of that because we are tied to a very structured system. But whichever way we go, I think that means a massive disruption for both the private schools market and the government schools. The government schools, the benefit is that there the government has slightly deeper pockets, so it won't be as disruptive financially or organizationally. But for private schools trying to survive in a competitive or semi-competitive field, this can be very disruptive. Obviously, some positives can come out of it, but as a business also, I'm sorry I'm using the word business in education, but as a business, this can be very disruptive for the schools as well. So something which is financially viable, but nonetheless also gives the kind of education that we've been talking about now. What would be the right model for that? How will that vary across the socioeconomic spectrum? I think that remains very much an open question now.
Thank you. And I think it's unavoidable for an economist to start thinking of everything as some kind of business. I'm afraid we're at the end of the hour, so we don't have more time for one question. There is only one question here that I won't ask our speakers to answer. It comes from Dilshad Delawala. And Delawala says, so is it being suggested here that Pakistan should do things that other societies are not? And I think I can answer for both of my speakers, absolutely not. I think every country is facing the same kinds of challenges and dilemmas and opportunities. So we're focusing here today on Pakistan, but we should not for 1 second think Pakistan is exceptional in having to deal with COVID-19. There are some problems that are unique to Pakistan, just as the problems that are unique to the UK or unique to the US. But every country, I think, probably needs to have these conversations on crisis. We're interested in Pakistan. So it remains for me to thank our speakers, Dr. Farid Panjwani, Dr. Faisal Bari. I think it's been, I have learned a lot. It's been hugely interesting. I'd like to thank Bloomsbury Pakistan again for agreeing to co-host this with AKU ISMC, and thank all of our speakers. I apologize to you. You've asked some brilliant questions, which I didn't get a chance to get to, but hopefully over the course of the series, some of these topics will come up again and we'll be able to revisit them. So without further ado, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, and look forward to the next one. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much. Bye.